Welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom, where we like to get below the surface of the news and sort of find the, the stories behind the headlines.
Right.
So if you guys are enjoying these deep dives,
Yeah.
We'd love it if you would hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
Of course.
And leave a comment, too.
Yeah, let us know what you think.
We always, we always love
Always appreciate the feedback.
hearing what you guys are thinking about.
Absolutely.
So today we are going to be diving into a story that's been making waves.
Okay.
And that is land reform in South Africa.
Interesting.
A controversial statement from former President Trump
Right.
and a question that's got everyone talking.
Mm-hmm.
Could Elon Musk be pulling the strings?
This is going to be a good one.
Yeah, this is a fascinating case.
Yeah.
Because you have this domestic policy issue in South Africa
Right.
that suddenly explodes onto the international scene
Right.
with potential ripple effects
Yeah.
across economies and global power dynamics.
So we're talking about the news out of South Africa and their attempt to, sort of address this really deeply rooted inequality
Right.
in land ownership that stems from their history of apartheid.
Right. It's a very complex situation with no easy answers.
Absolutely. You have to remember that even today, decades after the end of apartheid,
Yeah.
white South Africans, who represent a small percentage of the population, still own a disproportionately large amount of the country's land. And this new land expropriation law that we're talking about
Right.
aims to try and rectify that imbalance.
And this is where things get tricky.
Yes.
Right. Because while the goal is to redistribute land in a way that is just and equitable, the method, this idea of expropriation has sparked a lot of debate and concern.
For sure. And it's really important to clarify that this law doesn't mean like outright seizure of land.
Right.
It allows the state to take land for public good under certain conditions, very specific conditions. And the process is supposed to be legal and carefully considered.
Right. But then comes the bombshell.
Oh, boy.
Former President Trump enters the scene
Okay.
with a statement expressing deep concern over South Africa's land reform policy.
Right.
He even goes as far as to say that terrible things are happening
Wow.
and threatens to cut U.S. aid to the country.
Really strong language.
It was very strong language.
Yeah.
And what's striking is that these claims weren't really backed up by any concrete evidence
That's right.
of widespread land seizures or violence, as he seemed to suggest.
Right. It was just kind of like fear-mongering almost.
It really was. And President Ramaphosa, to his credit,
Yeah.
responded in a measured way.
Good.
He essentially said, look, no land's been confiscated.
Right.
We're operating within the framework of our laws,
Right.
and we're happy to have a conversation about this.
Yeah. Seems reasonable.
But the damage was done.
Oh, I bet.
Because the impact was immediate and undeniable. Trump's statement sent ripples through global markets. Oh, yeah. Leading to a weakening of the South African rand
Wow.
and a dip in their stocks and bonds.
It's like a domino effect.
It is. Right.
Yeah.
Investors get spooked by uncertainty.
Of course.
And a statement like that from a figure like Trump
Yeah.
injects a massive dose of uncertainty into the situation.
I can see why that would happen, for sure.
So this brings us to the question that's been swirling around this whole story.
Okay.
Why did Trump make such a strong statement, seemingly out of the blue?
Right.
Was he genuinely misinformed? Or was there something else, someone else influencing his perspective?
Right. Was there somebody whispering in his ear?
And this is where Elon Musk enters the picture.
Okay. The plot thickens.
The South African-born billionaire, who, as many know, served as an advisor to Trump.
Right. I mean, a very, very smart guy.
Yeah.
Very influential, obviously.
The timing of this is what makes it so intriguing.
I'm all ears.
Because just before this whole situation unfolded, Musk met with Bill Gates
Okay.
to advocate for continued funding for PEPFAR.
PEPFAR.
The U.S. Initiative for AIDS Relief in Africa,
Right.
PEPFAR, for those who aren't familiar, is a vital program that provides life-saving medication and support to millions of people across Africa affected by HIV/AIDS.
So important.
Extremely important.
Yeah.
And shortly after Musk's meeting, advocating for this program,
Okay.
Trump puts it on pause.
Wow. So you're saying...
It makes you wonder if there's a connection.
Right?
Could Musk's strong views on South Africa's land reform policy have somehow overshadowed this crucial humanitarian aid program in his discussions with Trump?
It really does make you wonder.
So we're left with this really unsettling possibility.
Yeah.
Did a billionaire with a personal agenda
Right.
potentially influence U.S. foreign policy
Mm-hmm.
in a way that jeopardizes a program critical to the health and well-being of millions?
It's a big question, a big question.
It's a huge question, and it's one we need to unpack, and we'll do just that as we continue our deep dive into this story.
I'm ready when you are.
Stay with us.
Yes, stick around, folks. This is going to be good. So, before the break, we were just talking about this idea that
Right.
Musk might have some personal views that are somehow impacting U.S. foreign policy, and specifically aid to South Africa.
Right.
It's a complicated situation,
Yeah.
and I think it's really important to try and consider all sides.
Absolutely. And we've been talking a lot about, the fallout from Trump's statement
Right.
and this whole Musk connection.
Mm-hmm.
But what about South Africa's perspective?
Yeah, what about them?
How are they navigating this whole situation?
Well, it certainly put them in a tough spot, hasn't it?
Yeah.
On the one hand, they're trying to address this historical injustice
Right.
of land ownership inequality.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're facing international scrutiny and economic pressure.
Yeah, it almost feels like they're being punished for trying to right a wrong.
In a way, yeah. And remember, we talked about how Trump's statement caused this dip in the South African economy.
Right.
Their currency weakened. Investors became wary.
Right.
And this is all happening at this time when they're trying to implement this very complex land reform policy.
So how does this impact South Africa's relationship with the U.S. going forward?
Right.
Because it seems like things have gotten pretty strained.
It's definitely put a strain on the relationship, for sure. The U.S. has been, a really significant trading partner for South Africa.
Right.
And, a source of aid.
Right.
But now, this incident has created a level of tension and distrust that's hard to ignore.
And could this push South Africa closer to other global powers like China?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because we know China has been actively investing in Africa,
Right.
forming strategic partnerships.
That's right.
So if South Africa feels alienated by the U.S., they might naturally look for support elsewhere.
It's a definite possibility, as the U.S. seems to be stepping back from its global leadership role. At least that was the trend.
Right.
During the Trump administration, China has been stepping in.
Right.
If South Africa feels alienated by the U.S., they might look for support elsewhere.
It makes you wonder if this whole situation, this land reform debate, and the potential influence of someone like Elon Musk could unintentionally shift the balance of global power.
Yeah, that's the unseen wisdom of it all, isn't it?
It really is.
How these seemingly isolated events can have ripple effects across economies, relationships, even the whole geopolitical landscape.
It's somewhere in the middle of all of this.
Right.
Is this incredibly important program, PEPFAR, that's providing life-saving treatment to millions of people.
Yeah, it's vital.
Feels like that's getting lost in the noise.
It's a valid concern,
Yeah.
If Musk's concerns about land reform did play a role in pausing PEPFAR, it raises serious questions about how personal agendas might be influencing U.S. foreign policy.
Right.
Potentially at the expense of humanitarian aid.
Which leads to a bigger question. Should individuals with wealth and connections, like Elon Musk, have this much influence on decisions that impact entire countries and millions of lives?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
On the one hand, individuals with, expertise and resources can definitely contribute to policy discussions.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's this risk of undue influence and personal interests overriding the broader national interest or ethical considerations.
So where do we go from here?
That's the question, isn't it?
Because we've uncovered all these potential connections, these unseen forces at play. But what does it all mean?
Yeah.
What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the takeaway is just the importance of awareness.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the historical context behind issues like land reform in South Africa.
Right.
We need to be aware of the potential influence that individuals might have on policy decisions. And we need to be aware of how interconnected our world is.
Right.
How seemingly isolated events can have these far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about looking beyond the surface.
Exactly.
Digging deeper and understanding the complexities of these global issues.
You got it.
And that's what we're going to continue to do as we move into the final part of this deep dive.
Okay, I'm excited.
We'll delve into the historical context of South Africa's land issue.
Okay.
Explore the potential roles of other players. And examine the implications for international relations in a world that seems increasingly divided.
I can't wait.
Stay with us. Okay, so we're back for this final part of our deep dive. We've explored the immediate fallout from Trump's statement,
Right.
this potential influence of Elon Musk, and, the anxiety rippling through these global markets. But now I think we need to take a step back and consider this historical backdrop of South Africa's land issue, because it's essential for understanding the complexities that we're seeing today.
Absolutely. To really grasp the depth of what's happening in South Africa, I think you have to understand the legacy of apartheid.
Right.
For decades, this system dispossessed Black South Africans of their land, pushing them into overcrowded townships and denying them economic opportunities that came with land ownership.
Right. So it's like trying to build a future on a foundation that's fundamentally flawed.
Exactly.
You can't just ignore that history.
And when apartheid ended in 1994, there was this immense hope that land would be returned to its rightful owners.
Right.
But the process has been incredibly slow and complicated.
Yeah.
There have been legal challenges, political roadblocks, and just the sheer scale of the issue has made it incredibly difficult to resolve quickly.
And now with this new expropriation law, it seems like South Africa is trying to accelerate the process, but they're facing a lot of pushback, both domestically and internationally.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, South Africa has this moral obligation to address this historical injustice. But they also need to ensure that any land redistribution is done fairly transparently.
Right.
And in a way that doesn't completely destabilize the country's economy. So you have anxieties on all sides.
Yeah, it feels like the weight of history is bearing down on every decision being made.
It is. And this brings us to the broader global implications.
Okay.
The timing of this is interesting because you have the U.S. under the Trump administration seemingly taking a more isolationist approach.
Right, withdrawing from agreements, engaging in trade wars.
Exactly.
So when Trump wades into this issue of South African land reform, is it genuine concern for property rights, or is there a larger strategy at play?
It's really hard to say for sure, but some analysts believe that Trump's actions were part of a broader effort to assert U.S. dominance on the global stage.
Right.
And push back against China's growing influence, particularly in Africa.
So it becomes this high-stakes game of chess with countries like South Africa caught in the middle.
In a sense, yes. I mean, the U.S. and China are vying for economic and political influence all around the world.
Right.
And countries rich in resources and strategically located like South Africa become key players in this competition.
Right. This is where it gets really complex. So what does this mean for the future of international relations?
Right.
If this trend continues, what does the world look like?
Well, I mean, if the U.S. continues to alienate allies and act unilaterally, it risks weakening its global standing.
Right.
Meanwhile, China is actively stepping in, offering alternative models of development and cooperation.
So we could be looking at a shift in global power with China taking on a more prominent role.
It's a real possibility, and countries like South Africa will have to navigate these competing interests very carefully.
Right.
They'll need to find a way to address their own domestic challenges while also balancing their relationships with these global powers.
It seems like we've uncovered a lot of unseen wisdom in this story, from the historical context of apartheid to the potential influence of individuals like Elon Musk.
Right.
To these shifting global power dynamics. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
What's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is just the importance of staying informed and engaged.
Wow.
We need to look beyond the headlines, understand the historical forces at play, and consider the potential consequences of seemingly isolated events.
And we can't forget the human element in all of this.
Absolutely.
We have millions of people relying on programs like PEPFAR, and their lives are directly affected by these political decisions.
It's a good reminder that even in the midst of complex global issues, the well-being of individuals should remain at the forefront of our considerations.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into this really intricate story of South Africa's land reform, the role of these influential figures, and the shifting tides of global power.
Thanks for having me.
Keep seeking that unseen wisdom